My sister told me not to come to her housewarming because her fiancé's family felt uncomfortable to be around someone like me. At the party, they mocked me and said I'd never make it. When Mom joined a video call, looked right at the screen, pointed and said, "Hold on, that's my daughter. Why didn't you tell me your sister is the reason I have this job?" The room went silent. Suddenly, everyone was nice to me, but I was already gone. I, 32M, never thought my own sister would be the one to cut me deepest, but here we are. Growing up, Sarah and I were close despite our 8-year age gap. She was the golden child, straight A's, perfect boyfriend, corporate job right out of college. I was the screw-up who dropped out of art school, worked odd jobs, and lived paycheck to paycheck trying to make it as a freelance graphic designer. Mom always worried about me more, which I think Sarah resented. Last month, Sarah called to tell me about her housewarming party. She'd just bought a beautiful house with her fiancé Marcus, whose family apparently had money. Old money, the kind that comes with opinions about people like me. She started the conversation normally enough, asking about work and life. Then came the pause I should have seen coming. She told me Marcus's parents would be there, along with his extended family, and they were very traditional people. Conservative. They valued stability and success, and she didn't want anything to make them uncomfortable. I asked what she meant by that, though I already knew. She explained that my appearance, the tattoos, the piercings, the way I dressed, might give them the wrong impression. She said they already had concerns about Marcus marrying into a family that wasn't quite their social level, and having me there might reinforce those concerns. She suggested maybe I could skip this one and we'd celebrate privately later. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own sister was disinviting me because I didn't look respectable enough for her future in-laws. I told her I understood and hung up before she could hear my voice crack. For 2 weeks, I tried to forget about it. I threw myself into work, landing a few small projects that kept me busy. But the hurt festered. This wasn't just about a party. It was about Sarah choosing her new family's comfort over her own brother's dignity. The night of the housewarming, I made a decision that surprised even me. I put on my best clothes, a simple black button-down and dark jeans, removed my visible piercings, and drove to Sarah's house. I wasn't going to cause a scene, but I needed to see for myself what was more important to her than family. I parked across the street and watched through the large front windows. The house was beautiful, filled with well-dressed people holding wine glasses and making polite conversation. I could see Sarah playing the perfect hostess, Marcus by her side, both of them glowing with happiness and success. I almost left then, but something made me walk up to that front door and ring the bell. Sarah's face went white when she saw me. She quickly stepped outside, closing the door behind her, and asked what I was doing there. I told her I just wanted to congratulate her on the house and meet Marcus's family properly. She looked panicked, glancing back at the door, then told me this really wasn't a good time. Before she could say more, Marcus appeared, probably wondering where his fiancée had gone. He looked me up and down with barely concealed distaste and asked if everything was okay. Sarah introduced me as her brother, and I watched Marcus's expression shift to something between surprise and disappointment. He told Sarah they should probably get back to their guests, but I asked if I could just come in for a few minutes to see the house. The request clearly made them both uncomfortable, but refusing would have been too obviously rude. Inside, I was introduced to Marcus's parents, Richard and Patricia, both exactly what I'd expected. Polite but cold, they shook my hand with the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. Within minutes, I overheard Patricia whisper to another guest about how different Sarah's family was from what they'd expected. The evening became a masterclass in subtle humiliation. Marcus's uncle made comments about how hard it must be for people in creative fields to make ends meet. His cousin asked if I'd ever considered going back to school for something more practical. Every conversation felt like a gentle interrogation designed to confirm their worst assumptions about me. The breaking point came when Marcus's brother started talking about success and ambition. He looked directly at me and said some people are just content with mediocrity, that not everyone has the drive to really make something of themselves. The group around us chuckled, and I saw Sarah look away, embarrassed but not defending me. I excused myself to the bathroom, but really I just needed air. Standing in Sarah's hallway, looking at photos of her perfect life, I felt smaller than I had in years. I was about to leave when I heard my phone ring. It was Mom, calling for our weekly video chat. We'd started doing them when she moved to Phoenix for work last year. I almost declined, but something made me answer. Maybe I needed to see a friendly face, even through a screen. Mom appeared on my phone, sitting in what looked like a very nice office. She asked how I was and where I was calling from. I told her I was at Sarah's housewarming party, and she got excited, asking to see the house and meet Sarah's fiancé. I hesitated, but Mom insisted. She said she'd been curious about Marcus since Sarah had been so secretive about his family. Against my better judgment, I walked back toward the living room, holding my phone so Mom could see through the camera. The timing couldn't have been more perfect or devastating, depending on your perspective. I emerged from the hallway just as Marcus's father was in the middle of telling a story about their family business. Mom's voice came through my phone speaker, asking who all these people were. I quietly told her these were Marcus's parents and extended family. Mom squinted at the screen, then suddenly her expression changed completely. She asked me to hold the phone steady and move closer. Richard was still talking when Mom's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. She told me to hold on, that she recognized someone. The room gradually quieted as people noticed the voice coming from my phone. Mom looked directly at the screen, pointed, and said she knew that man. She asked why I hadn't told her that my sister's fiancé was related to Richard Morrison, the CEO of Morrison Industries. The room went completely silent. Mom continued, her voice carrying clearly through the speaker. She explained that Richard Morrison was the reason she had her current job. 6 months ago, his company had acquired the firm where she worked, and he'd personally promoted her to regional director after being impressed with her work on a major project. She told the room that she'd been trying to figure out how to thank him properly, and here he was at her daughter's party. She said she'd had no idea Sarah was marrying into the Morrison family, and what a wonderful coincidence this was. Richard's face had gone through several shades of red during Mom's speech. The man who'd spent the evening treating me like something scraped off his shoe was now staring at a phone screen, realizing that the mediocre brother he'd been dismissing was the son of one of his most valued employees. The transformation in the room was immediate and nauseating. Patricia suddenly wanted to know all about my graphic design work. Marcus's uncle asked if I'd ever considered doing corporate consulting. The same people who'd been subtly mocking me minutes earlier were now treating me like I might be useful to them. But I was already done. I told Mom I'd call her back later, that I needed to go. She seemed confused by the sudden change in my tone, but said goodbye. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked around the room at all these people who were now smiling at me with genuine interest. Sarah approached me, her face a mixture of relief and embarrassment. She started to say something about how nice it was that Mom knew Marcus's father, how small the world was, but I cut her off. I told her I was leaving. She looked surprised and asked why, since everyone was being so friendly now. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and realized she didn't even understand what had just happened. I explained that these people weren't being nice to me. They were being nice to Mom's son, to Richard Morrison's employee's child, to someone who might be useful to them. The same person they'd been dismissing all evening hadn't changed. Only their perception of my value had shifted. Sarah tried to argue that I was being too sensitive, that people were just getting to know me better, but I could see in her eyes that she knew I was right. She'd watched them treat me like garbage until they learned I might be connected to something they cared about. I walked toward the door, and Sarah followed, asking me not to leave angry. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Done pretending that conditional acceptance was the same as love. Done making excuses for people who only valued me when I could benefit them. Marcus appeared as I reached the door, suddenly very interested in maintaining a relationship with his future brother-in-law. He suggested we should get together soon. Maybe I could show him some of my design work. Perhaps there might be opportunities for collaboration. I looked at this man who'd spent the evening looking at me like I was something unpleasant he'd stepped in, now trying to network with me because of a phone call. I told him I'd think about it, knowing I never would. As I walked to my car, I could hear the party continuing behind me, voices animated with new energy. They were probably already spinning the story, turning the evening's awkwardness into an amusing coincidence, a funny misunderstanding that worked out well for everyone. But I knew better. I'd seen who these people really were when they thought I couldn't offer them anything. I'd watched my own sister choose their comfort over my dignity, then act confused when I wouldn't pretend everything was fine. Update 1. The fallout started the next morning. Sarah called 3 times before I finally answered. She was upset that I'd left so abruptly and wanted to talk about what happened. She said Marcus's parents had asked about me after I left, wanting to know more about my work and background. I told her that was exactly the problem. These people had spent hours treating me like I was beneath them, only to suddenly find me interesting when they learned about Mom's connection to their family. Sarah insisted I was overreacting, that people just needed time to warm up to new faces. I asked her point blank, if Mom hadn't called, if that connection had never been revealed, would Marcus's family have treated me any differently by the end of the night? The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. She finally admitted that maybe they'd been a bit cold initially, but said that was just how wealthy people were with strangers. She begged me not to let this ruin our relationship or affect her engagement. I told Sarah I loved her, but I couldn't pretend this hadn't happened. She'd made a choice when she asked me not to come to protect her fiancé's family's comfort. She'd made another choice when she watched them belittle me and said nothing. The phone call hadn't changed who any of these people were. It had just revealed their true priorities. Mom called later that day, confused about what had happened at the party. She said she'd been thinking about the strange way our call had ended and wanted to make sure everything was okay. I explained the whole situation, how Sarah had initially disinvited me, how I'd been treated at the party, and how everything changed when Mom's connection to Richard Morrison was revealed. Mom was quiet for a long time after I finished. Finally, she told me she was proud of how I'd handled myself, but heartbroken about Sarah's choices. She said she'd raised us both to value family over everything else, and she didn't understand how Sarah had lost sight of that. Mom also mentioned something that made my blood run cold. During her conversation with Richard Morrison the next day at work, he'd brought up meeting me at the party. He'd made some comment about how he hoped there were no hard feelings about the initial misunderstanding, and how he looked forward to getting to know Sarah's family better. The fact that he'd even mentioned it to Mom meant he knew exactly how his family had behaved and was trying to manage the situation. These people weren't just classist, they were calculated about it. Update 2. 3 weeks later, Marcus reached out directly. He sent a long text message about how he'd been thinking about our conversation at the party and really wanted to explore potential business opportunities. He mentioned that his family's company was always looking for fresh creative talent and wondered if I'd be interested in discussing some contract work. The message was perfectly crafted, professional, friendly, with just the right amount of enthusiasm. It was also completely transparent in its motivation. This man had looked through me like I was invisible until he learned I might be useful to his family's business interests. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me was curious about what kind of work they might offer, and honestly, I could use the money. But every time I considered it, I remembered the look on his face when Sarah first introduced me, the way his family had spoken about people like me when they thought I couldn't offer them anything. Sarah texted me constantly during this period, asking if Marcus had reached out and what I was planning to do. She seemed genuinely confused about why I was hesitating to pursue what she saw as a great opportunity. I finally called her and tried to explain one more time. I told her that accepting work from Marcus's family would validate everything they'd done. It would prove that their initial assessment was correct, that I was only worth their time if I could benefit them somehow. Sarah got frustrated and accused me of being stubborn and self-destructive. She said I was letting pride get in the way of a real chance to improve my situation. She pointed out that this could be the break I'd been waiting for, the chance to finally prove myself professionally. That's when I realized Sarah still didn't understand. She saw Marcus's offer as vindication, as proof that his family had come around and recognized my value. She couldn't see that their sudden interest was actually the most insulting part of the whole experience. I told Marcus no. I sent a polite message thanking him for thinking of me, but explaining that I was committed to other projects and wouldn't be available for contract work with his family's company. His response was immediate and telling. He seemed genuinely surprised by my refusal and asked if there was anything they could do to make the opportunity more attractive. When I didn't respond, he followed up with increasingly generous offers, higher pay, flexible deadlines, creative freedom. Each message made it clearer that this wasn't about my skills or talent. This was about managing a potentially awkward family situation and keeping Mom's boss happy. I was being offered money to pretend the whole thing had never happened. Update 3. The real test came 2 months later at Mom's birthday dinner. Sarah had organized a family gathering at a nice restaurant, and she'd invited Marcus and his parents. She presented it as a chance for everyone to get to know each other better in a more relaxed setting. I almost didn't go. The thought of sitting through another evening of fake pleasantries with people who'd shown me exactly who they were made my stomach turn. But it was Mom's birthday, and she'd specifically asked me to be there. The dinner was exactly what I'd expected. Richard and Patricia Morrison were perfectly polite, asking about my work with what seemed like genuine interest. They complimented Mom on raising such talented children and made all the right noises about family being the most important thing. But I could see through it all. Every smile was calculated, every question designed to gather information that might be useful later. They were performing the role of gracious future in-laws while carefully assessing what kind of people they were really dealing with. The breaking point came when Richard started talking about second chances and how first impressions could sometimes be misleading. He looked directly at me and said he hoped I knew that his family judged people on their character and accomplishments, not on superficial things like appearance or background. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. This man was literally rewriting history, pretending that the evening at Sarah's house had been some kind of misunderstanding rather than a clear display of his family's values. I excused myself from the table and stepped outside for air. Mom followed me a few minutes later, asking if I was okay. I told her I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't sit there and pretend that these people had suddenly become different, couldn't participate in this elaborate fiction that we were all just one big happy family now. Mom was quiet for a moment, then told me something that changed everything. She said that Richard Morrison had been asking about me at work, making casual inquiries about my business and personal life. He'd even suggested that the company might have some graphic design needs that could be sent my way. The realization hit me like a truck. This wasn't just about managing an awkward family situation anymore. Richard Morrison was actively trying to create leverage over me through my mother's job. He was using his position as her boss to gather information and create opportunities that would put me in his debt. I looked at Mom and saw that she understood the implications too. Her face was pale, and she looked older than I'd ever seen her. We went back inside, and I made it through the rest of dinner with a smile plastered on my face. But something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't just about class differences or social awkwardness anymore. This was about power and control, about people who were used to getting what they wanted and couldn't accept that someone might refuse their offers. When the evening ended, Richard shook my hand and mentioned again how much he hoped we could work together in the future. His grip was firm, his smile warm, but his eyes were cold and calculating. I realized then that this wasn't over. People like Richard Morrison don't just accept rejection and move on. They find other ways to get what they want, other forms of pressure to apply. As I drove home that night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait around to see what kind of leverage they might try to create. I wasn't going to let them use my family relationships or my mother's job as weapons against me. The next morning, I started making plans to leave town. I'd been thinking about relocating for a while anyway, maybe trying my luck in a bigger market where there might be more opportunities for freelance designers. But now it wasn't just about career advancement. It was about getting away from people who saw my refusal to play their games as a problem to be solved rather than a boundary to be respected. Sarah called me crying when she found out about my plans. She begged me not to leave, said she couldn't understand why I was letting this situation destroy our family. I tried one last time to explain. I told her that our family had been damaged long before that phone call at her housewarming party. It had been damaged the moment she decided that her fiancé's family's comfort was more important than her brother's dignity. The phone call hadn't created the problem. It had just revealed how conditional everyone's love and respect really was. And now that I'd seen behind the mask, I couldn't unsee it. I moved 3 states away 6 weeks later. I found a small apartment in a city where nobody knew my name or my family's connections. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely, knowing that every interaction I had was based on who I actually was rather than who I might be useful to. Sarah still calls sometimes, usually when she's had wine and is feeling sentimental about family. She tells me about wedding planning and asks when I'm coming home for a visit. I listen and make non-committal responses, but we both know I'm not coming back. Mom visits every few months. She never pressures me to reconcile with Sarah or return home, but I can see the sadness in her eyes. She knows that her family has been broken by people who never cared about us as individuals, only as assets to be managed or obstacles to be overcome. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never gone to that party, if I'd just accepted Sarah's disinvitation and stayed home. But then I remember that the problem wasn't the party. It was everything the party revealed about the people I thought I knew. I'm building a good life here, slowly and on my own terms. My client base is growing, and I'm finally making enough money to feel secure. More importantly, I'm surrounded by people who value authenticity over connections, who judge me on my work rather than my usefulness to their social climbing. The revenge, I realized, wasn't in exposing their hypocrisy at the party. It was in refusing to let them rewrite the story, in walking away from their conditional acceptance and building something real somewhere else. They wanted to use me, to manage me, to turn me into another asset in their portfolio of useful relationships. Instead, I became the one thing people like that can't stand, someone who simply doesn't care what they think. And that, more than any dramatic confrontation or public humiliation, was the victory I needed.